In business today, 3 things to know. First, running an insurgency costs money. Where's ISIS, the Iraqi militants, getting it? Who is funding them? And can we cut off the cash before they march to Baghdad? Then, the IMF rains on the U.S. recovery. Christine Lagarde and her group cut U.S. economic growth forecasts. And a lawsuit in California may make it easier to fire bad teachers. The battle over tenure is about to go nationwide. Arisexchange for Monday starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Iraqi forces lost control of another northern city to Sunni extremists on Monday. The loss of the city, Tal Afar, underlined concerns that the government of President al-Maliki could collapse. The Obama administration is considering talks with Iran in an effort to stabilize the Iraqi government, a move some lawmakers reluctantly support. Over the weekend, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham had this to say.
We need to all make sure Baghdad doesn't fall. So, yes, we need a dialogue of some kind with the Iranians.
What is clear is that the group known as ISIS is both well-organized and well-financed, leading to questions: how is it funded and who are the main benefactors? Joining us now from Washington, D.C. is James Blue, Arise News Washington Bureau Chief. Good afternoon, James. First, give us a little bit background of this group, where they came from, because many of us just found that they sprung up seemingly out of nowhere.
Well, no, they have certainly been around for a while, and they have been successful in Syria. They sort of formed as a way and as a branch of al-Qaeda in Syria, and they were taking on the Assad regime in Syria and doing quite well in the north and eastern parts of Syria. They've used those gains. They have recruited from around the Arab world, and they are really trying to move and to take down Iraq, which is, as you know, a Shiite government, and they're trying to take down Iraq, moving across the country at rapid pace.
You said that they got a lot of their start in Syria. Are these Iraqis fighting in Iraq, these militants?
Well, they are largely a Sunni force, and as you know, in Islam, there are 2 major groups, the Sunni and the Shia. And this is the group that, the Sunnis, that actually ruled Iraq during the Saddam Hussein time. Saddam Hussein was a Sunni. The Sunnis in Iraq are a minority. And as they have sort of gotten strength, they have just sort of been able to attract Sunnis from around the region. They are financed. They are financed and supported by other Sunni regimes across the Middle East.
Yes. So let's follow the money a little bit here. Where are they getting their main sense of funding?
The main funding comes from 3 sort of primary states: Kuwait, Qatar, and most importantly, Saudi Arabia. The money actually gets into Iraq through Kuwait because they have a very porous border. It's very easy to get money over the road into Iraq. And they're also, Andrew, because they're being so successful, they're looting banks. And just last week, they took off a bank and took about $430 million from the main bank in Mosul. So they are awash with cash right now. And the real fear is that they're going to be almost unstoppable.
So as they basically go on, they're basically collecting more of Iraqi treasure, if you will. Is this cash basically Iraqi money, dinars? Do we know?
It's mainly U.S. dollars that they have been able to pull out of the sort of banks in and around Iraq. Because although the dinar is the main currency in Iraq, I think a lot of the reserve monies, and this was the main central bank in Mosul, the holdings are in dollars. So right now they have $430 million that they can add to their war chest.
You mentioned Saudi Arabia. So once again, Saudi Arabia is sort of at the center of funding a terrorist group in many ways. Does the United States have some pressure points here on the Saudi regime?
Well, I think what the United States is trying to do is a very delicate balance. As you said in the intro, the U.S. is planning to meet and work with Iran, possibly to counter this Sunni force. The U.S. certainly needs Saudi Arabia as an ally. Saudi Arabia certainly needs the U.S. But this is the type of confrontation and the type of calamity that could really fray those long, strong ties that have been so important for so long.
And just like any political organization, the more successful you are, the more money that pours in, right? So I imagine this group is getting better and better funding.
Well, what I've heard from some Kuwaitis is that there is a lot more money, given their success. There's a lot more money sort of coming through. And the irony here is that Kuwait, which in 1990 was invaded by Saddam Hussein, who was a Sunni leader, they are now supporting another Sunni group trying to take back Iraq, which had gone Shia as a result of the U.S. invasion.
James Blue in Washington, D.C. Thank you. Turning to some U.S. economic news now, the nation's homeowners are feeling more confident about the housing market, but still not so great. Home builder confidence rose to 49 in June, the highest since January and up from 45 in May. Readings, however, below 50 indicate builders' views sale conditions as still poor. And factory output rose 0.6% in May, according to the U.S. Federal Reserve. That's after dropping 0.1% in April. Taking a look at how the markets finished the day, a pretty quiet day on Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average just up 5 and change, closing at 16,781. The S&P 500 up $1.62, and the Nasdaq climbing 1045. Taking a look at stocks we're watching today, Starbucks says it's giving away free college tuition to thousands of its employees. The coffee chain is partnering with Arizona State University and offering free tuition for juniors and seniors. Freshmen and sophomores will receive discounted tuition. Starbucks up 40 cents. Medical device manufacturer Medtronic buying its rival Bowdon for a reported $42.9 billion. The move could reduce the firm's tax payments as the combined company will be based in Ireland. Medtronic down 67 cents. And AT&T says 3 employees of one of the company's vendors accessed personal data belonging to some of its customers between April 9th and April 21st. The company did not say how many accounts were affected during the data breach or why it took so long for them to confirm it. AT&T down a nickel to $34.98. And commodities, gold pulling back to $290 and oil back by 9 cents, still at $106.82. The International Monetary Fund has lowered its forecast for the U.S. economy. The IMF now says the gross domestic product will grow at just 2% this year, thanks to a bad first quarter. Jim Awad is the chairman of Plimsoll Mark Capital, is once again here on Arisexchange to talk about the IMF decision and the economic data. Jim, good afternoon to you.
Thank you.
IMF says 2%. Are we surprised by that number? Because that is lower than what many economists have been telling us.
Well, what's going to be very interesting, the Fed is meeting this week, and they have an opportunity to lower their forecast, which is somewhat higher than that. They are closer to 3% than to 2%. So it is a little bit surprising. And what I would say is we're going to know over the next 2 or 3 quarters whether we are really stuck in this 2% growth mode or whether we're going to break out to 3%.
Yeah, the question here is this sort of a historical look back at a first quarter, which was pretty much a disaster across the board, or is it a forward-looking number? Because if it's a backwards number, we could say, okay, that was an aberration. If it's a forward number, we have some issues.
Yeah, well, they're on the low end of the range of forecasts for the year. So most people are forecasting enough growth in the following 3 quarters, or the other than the first quarter of this year, so that you would get to above 2%. So I would say if they are right, it's going to be surprising and disappointing to most people.
Because there's some concern that the first quarter economy actually contracted, which means we have more to go.
More to make up, and the revision will some revisions have it down to minus 2%.
Yep.
But in theory, we should get the bounce back from that in this quarter, and the 2 quarters should even themselves out, and then in the 3rd and 4th quarter, you will get whatever the natural growth rate of the economy is at this stage.
Why is this number so important to the Fed, the GDP? Follow this through for us.
Well, because the Fed has laid out that they are going to stay easy through that they're going to continue to taper, but keep interest rates near zero through most of 2015. And if the number is close to 2% and inflation for this year, and if inflation stays below 2%, then it increases the likelihood that the Fed is going to be good for that forecast of rates at near zero through the end of 2015.
Do you think the Fed may do anything in the surprise area as far as pulling back on the monthly bond buying program?
No, I think they will definitely continue. The markets like predictability. The markets are very happy with the pace of taper. The
About
Treasury,
$10 billion.
About $10 billion. The
time.
Treasury has actually rallied and been stronger, having digested that number and living with it.
And the markets have been living with the number as well.
Right. So I think there is zero chance, I'm sort of going out on a limb, they'd be silly to fool with the taper number or to change it in any way. Again, the one thing you want to look for with the Fed is, do they lower their forecast for the year?
And once again, we've discussed this before, but the risk to the markets is always sort of the geopolitical risk, because that's the one thing we can't forecast. And now with Iraq blowing up, what's the impact on the markets if Iraq just completely falls apart?
Well, frankly, the markets are very mercantile, and they don't really care about Iraq. They care about the flow and availability of oil. And if Iraq disassembles as a state, but somebody's shipping and selling that oil to the world markets, it will be a non-event. Now,
they don't care about the face on the product as long as the product is getting out the door.
Right. Now, there are longer-term issues that can affect the United States, but in terms of the stock market for this year, it's only the availability of oil.
And it is important to note that oil, the price of oil becomes, and according to your notes, a tax. And we have to remember that it really is a major driver of the economy.
It's a major driver, but as long as the price goes up gradually and predictably, the system can adjust. It's if you get a shock, which would come from a supply disruption. That's all of a sudden there was X amount of oil not available, and oil went to 125 or 130 from around 105, and people didn't have a chance to plan for it.
That's right.
It would affect logistics in businesses. It would affect consumer confidence. It would be a negative, and it would contribute to the credibility of that 2% kind of number.
Turning to the markets right now, the stocks sort of having a mediocre last few days or so. Where do you think the value of the stock market is right now?
Yeah, the market is fairly valued. There are certain stocks that are undervalued, certain stocks that are overvalued. The proclivity of the market is to go up as a whole with earnings, which are about 5 or 6% for this year, which would take it a little bit higher than where it is now. So you're really going to have to disrupt the market for that not to happen.
No correction this summer then?
Oh, I think you could have a correction any minute, any time, for any reason, and either geopolitical or, as you've heard me say many times, there's been a lot of speculation in the credit markets. The credit markets are as dangerous as they were in 2007. So I think a surprise would come from either an accident in the credit markets or a geopolitical event.
Next time you're on, let's talk about the credit markets, because that's a very interesting statement.
We need to drill down on that.
We will do that. Jim Awad, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Coming up, blacklisted at the bank, why more Americans are finding they are persona non grata. You're watching Arisexchange.
If I was building my own network, it would be for the people, by the people. It would be very diverse. It would be with every culture you can think of.
If I was to start my own news network, it would reflect positive and negative within the continents and the countries around the world.
I think that I would be more looking towards young people.
If I were to build my own news network, it would look like New York City. Old, young, fresh, hip, classic.
If I was to build my own news network, I would just have people from all over who are very connected and diverse.
If I was to build my own news network, my own world network, I would love a correspondent in every country, every location, every city. I mean, it's kind of unrealistic, but how cool would it be to get local stories from the impoverished country, the impoverished city that we don't know about?
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Welcome back to Arisexchange. Imagine being blacklisted from a bank. About 1 million Americans cannot get basic checking accounts because their name appears in a database of people who have mismanaged their finances, including bouncing just a few checks. Now, New York's Attorney General is pushing banks to rethink how they use this database. Why would a bank stop someone from opening an account, and who is to blame? Julie Menin is the commissioner of the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs. Commissioner, welcome to Arisexchange, and thank you for spending a few minutes with us. I don't think a lot of people know about this because we are just used to going into a bank and opening a bank account. So how did we get here?
Well, this is a very important moment. The Attorney General of New York, Eric Schneiderman, announced today that Capital One Bank, he got them to agree to not use check system, which is a system that many financial institutions are utilizing to determine whether someone has a credit risk or not. The problem with the system, however, is it's not particularly transparent, and many people are put on this list and they're not sure why. And sometimes it's for very minor infractions, such as bouncing a check.
Does this show up on your credit report, meaning so you can know if you're on this list?
Not always, and that's the problem. We believe that check systems is not particularly transparent. Many people do not even realize that they're on the list, and the problem is once you're on the list, it can prevent you from being able to open up a bank account.
Banks say the system, though, is set up to prevent from basically financial scams. So how did this sort of get away from them?
Well, we don't want to get away from the issue of fraud and financial scams. So in that regard, we want to make sure, obviously, that financial institutions are getting the kind of relevant information they need. What we are trying to prevent, however, is the minor infractions. A low-income individual who has bounced perhaps one check, or a student.
Can one check get you blacklisted?
It can. This is a problem with the system, is the system is not particularly transparent. So check system doesn't always tell you if you're on this list or why you're on this list. And it's not only low-income individuals that we're talking about, Andrew. We're talking about many different groups. We're talking about students, many students who have bounced a check or two, and then suddenly they're on the list, and they cannot open up a bank account.
And they can't go to any bank, you say? They have to go
if the bank uses check systems, which many financial institutions do. So right now, nationwide, what we're talking about is there are 10 million unbanked individuals. These are people who literally...
10 million people who do not have checking accounts.
Yes, and in New York, it's 825,000 New Yorkers. It's a lot of people, and what this means for their future is that they're not really able to save.
Why would a bank not want you to have a checking account? The risk to the bank is relatively small. A check doesn't clear. They don't have to pay any money on it, other than the fees that they incur.
Well, this is exactly why we're talking about this issue. We believe at the Department of Consumer Affairs that it's imperative that the banks are really looking at correct information, that they're not denying people the ability to be able to open up an account for minor infractions. And because really what this means long term is that people then are keeping cash at home, cash under the mattress. Or they're going to check cashing services, which are charging usurious amounts. Some studies show it's up to $1,000 a family in check cashing services.
Are the banks put in this position, however, looking at it from the bank's perspective, because they're burdened by so many new regulations that they have to comply with, that do you think that they're over sort of protecting themselves?
I think that what's happened is that a legitimate concern of fraud, making sure that we're not dealing with fraud, has now morphed into something completely different, where minor infractions are now getting people put on this list. So that's what we're really trying to get to. And what this means is we want to make sure we're focusing on financial empowerment for low-income individuals, for students, for people who have found themselves in this situation.
Do you see some banks stepping up now and as a competitive reason saying we're going to accept these people?
And that's what's so exciting with the announcement that the Attorney General of New York made today with Capital One. And today, the Department of Consumer Affairs, we are calling on all financial institutions to stop using check system as a deterrent, as an impediment for small infractions.
Finally, if you are on this list and you can't get a bank account, what can you do?
Well, first of all, you should definitely contact the Attorney General of your particular state, because what the Attorney General of New York has done, we believe other attorney generals should follow. So they should really start there and make sure, but they should also deal with their elected officials. They should talk to their bank and find out why this is happening, because for a lot of times it's for the smallest reason, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen.
I think a lot of people are very surprised that they bounce one check and they can get basically tossed out.
Right. So we really want to make sure that we're being proactive about this, and that people know that they should, if they're on this list, particularly for erroneous reasons, that this doesn't happen anymore.
Okay, Commissioner, we hope to have you back on then.
Thank you so much.
Somewhere down the line to tell us where we are in this process.
Absolutely.
Okay, very interesting story. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for stopping by. Taking a look at some of our top business stories now, stories making news around the world. The hits keep coming for General Motors. The automaker is recalling 3.2 million more cars in the U.S. because of ignition switch problems. GM says the switches can unexpectedly move out of the run position if the cars are jarred, such as going over a pothole, which can shut off the engines and disable power steering. The recall involving 2000 and 2014 model years is part of a GM review of ignition switches after the company recalled 2.6 million older small cars earlier this year for a similar problem. If you don't pay your utility bill, the electric company cuts you off. And that's what Russia did to Ukraine today. Gazprom, the Russia state exporter, had asked Ukraine to pay almost half of a total debt of around $4 billion by this morning or face supply cuts. Both sides blame the other for the collapse of last-ditch talks, the latest in the crisis between the two countries. Ukraine has enough gas and underground storage to meet its needs until December. China is now the world's biggest corporate borrower. According to Standard & Poor's, Chinese corporate borrowers owed $14.2 trillion in 2013, surpassing the $13.1 trillion owed by U.S. corporations. The report expects Chinese companies to take in a third of global company debt needs over the next 5 years. Analysts say that underscores the growing risk China's debt market is imposing on the global financial system. The state of Mississippi says Experian is jeopardizing the credit rating of millions of Americans. The state is suing Experian, accusing the credit reporting giant of knowingly including false data in the credit files of consumers, jeopardizing their ability to get loans and jobs. It says some consumers are even wrongly put on a federal terrorism watch list. Mississippi is the first state to file suit over what it considers a violation of federal laws aimed at protecting consumers' credit. A separate group of states is probing similar allegations involving the credit reporting industry at large. And it is the case of employees acting badly. This 3-year-old girl, scarred from a pit bull attack, was allegedly asked by an employee of a KFC in Mississippi to leave because she scared other customers. According to her grandmother, the little girl cried all the way home from the restaurant and is now embarrassed by her appearance. KFC is looking into allegations and, as an apology, is donating $30,000 towards the girl's medical bills. And then there's the toddler who was forced to urinate in her seat after a JetBlue flight attendant refused to let her use the bathroom while the plane was waiting on the tarmac. When the toddler's mom got up to clean her daughter's mess, the same flight attendant objected and reported her to the pilot as a non-compliant passenger. JetBlue called the family to apologize, offered a $50 credit and $5,000 to a charity of their choice. JetBlue employees reportedly will be undergoing sensitivity training as well. Ahead, our favorite person of the day won't be getting any frequent flyer points, that's for sure. You're watching Arisexchange.
If I was building my own news network, first thing I think I'd want high-quality reporters, very educated, intelligent people.
Hello, I'm Francesca Maxime.
I'm Julian Phillips.
I'm Wendy Gillette.
I'm Sophia Song Hai.
I'm Gary Anthony Ramsey. Thank you for joining us here in New York City.
I would like to see more people of color represented in high positions in media.
We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well.
People need to understand the problems that are going on in the community are much closer than we actually think they are.
Kayla Phillips is one of the shoppers who is suing Barney's, and she is here with her attorney. What is it that you want from them?
Not to judge every African-American person that comes in your store.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention and not for the right reasons. Today, it is a JetBlue passenger who had an epic meltdown on a flight to Las Vegas. The unnamed man apparently became unhinged while arguing with his family in a foreign language. What began as a shouting match turned into him lunging over seats. Of course, someone videotaped it on their phone, and here is a clip. It's better than the live TV that they have on JetBlue. The pilot diverted the plane to Detroit, and the man was restrained with plastic handcuffs. It's unknown what provoked the man. Maybe it was the potato chips JetBlue serves instead of real food. Who knows? Something must literally be in the air, however. There were 8,200 cases of unruly passengers last year, up by 3,000 from the year before. So for being a bad flyer, this unnamed JetBlue passenger is our favorite person of the day. Coming up, how California has struck a blow against teacher tenure. You're watching Arisexchange.
If I was building my own news network, I think I'd want broad, in-depth knowledge of important issues throughout the world.
I would want to recruit a fairly diverse staff that had different life experiences before they came to news.
We want to see how we can help ourselves and help benefit other people, and not just see what's up with the celebrities and where they're going and traveling and buying this and buying that.
If I were to build my own news network, it would certainly have to reflect a diversity of culture, because that's the global situation. That's the global reality.
I would probably bring a lot of personal stories, really personal stories from the leaders of all countries.
If I was to build my own news network, I would just have people who from all over who are very connected and diverse.
Vice News, every culture, every angle.
You're going to hear more and more about teacher tenure because the issue is heating up across the country after a judge struck down California's teacher tenure law last week as unconstitutional. Judge says teacher tenure deprives children of their constitutional rights of a quality education, specifically hurting poor and minority students the most. Choice Media founder and executive director Bob Bowdon joins us to tell us if more states are going to follow suit. Choice Media is an investigative video website promoting educational reform, and I take it against teacher tenure.
Well, generally, I do sometimes have commentaries myself, but we also have a website posting mostly mainstream media news stories about the world of education, and we do the Reform School webcast, which is kind of seeks to be the nightly news of public schools.
Okay, so what was the judge's rationale here in striking down tenure, and is it going to stand? Because I mean, whether you're for tenure or not, it's a little bit of a stretch legally.
Well, what is tenure or the striking down?
The striking down.
Well, I mean, no. I think that the California Constitution has provisions that provide students with
education,
thorough education, exactly. And so, what he did was struck down 5 statutes, which include things like LIFO, last in, first out. Part of the rules in California, saying that if there is an enrollment drop, you have to cut staff in a school. That by law, you have to do that purely based on seniority. So if you work really hard and you've worked for 3 years and I phone it in and I've worked for 4 years,
you get to stay.
I get to stay.
And the
you
issue,
hit the
and
brakes.
the issue about tenure is that in fewer than 18 months in many cases, teachers basically get a lifetime job, which is unheard of in almost any profession.
Almost any. No one would run a business this way. You would be laughed at in Silicon Valley if you proposed this, or in Wall Street, or any other competitive business industry, right? So, and in fact, Arne Duncan, the U.S. Secretary of Education, wrote about the Vergara decision, and it was in, I believe, yesterday's Department of Education website. And he talks about the fact that it's only 18 months in California. You know, in my opinion, to say like, oh, but if it were 3 years, then you should have a guaranteed job for life. That's not really the correct focus.
Not even better either.
Right. It's that you should be judged based on your effectiveness, no matter how many years you've been doing it.
And I guess the argument here is that this is really for bad teachers. It is teachers not, who cannot teach. They get chance after chance after chance.
Right.
And for example, in New York City, we have something called the rubber room, which you're familiar with. If you're a really bad teacher,
that's right,
they simply pay you to sit out.
In fact, people have been over a decade in New York paid to not teach. You are considered so bad or so dangerous they can't even put you in front of kids.
Yeah.
It really is crazy. It's absolutely preposterous. The fact that unions would be defending this, like if I were, through some sort of alternate reality, advising the unions on what to do for their public messaging, I would say, well, don't defend this.
It feels like the unions are coming around a little bit with the concept. In some cases, you do not think so at all. They are going to dig their feet in on tenure because their position is that in many cases it becomes political and teachers get forced out who shouldn't get forced out. So how do you protect those teachers?
Right. They say that this is just due process, and then without tenure, you'll just be fired based on somebody doesn't like you. A principal doesn't like, the cut of your jib.
Which does happen in the real world, of course.
Right, but so you can fire people for cause. It doesn't. It happens in all kinds of industries. It doesn't mean you have to fire no one. In California, it was 91 teachers over a 2-year period out of the 300,000 tenured teachers in the state. It's like you could round off to 0 the number of tenured teachers that are fired for cause, basically anywhere in the country. In the state of Kansas we looked at, it's 95,000 teachers and 2 were fired if they were tenured.
It is interesting that it is sort of the minority communities and the poorer communities that are pushing charter schools, for example, aren't they?
Sure, absolutely.
And they don't have a tenure problem.
Well, that's right. They're generally non-unionized. There's some unionized charter schools, but
and there's nothing wrong with you. You support unions, but not necessarily with these components.
Well, I support school choice, where parents can pick if they want whatever school makes the most sense to their kid, and whatever's the best fit. Even in the same family, different siblings might fit better in a different kind of school. So lots of different charter schools and district schools and private schools. If it's unionized or not, just what's the best school, let the parent pick.
Let me ask you, how big of an issue, though, is tenure in the sense of how many bad teachers are really sort of stuck in the classroom? I mean, do we have a sense that this issue is overblown at all?
I mean, Ask any parent, just remember, how about remembering your own childhood or mine or the viewer, remembering there, did you have good and bad and teachers in between? Everyone I know had all three of that, right? And so ask any parent who's frustrated with a situation, of which there are millions in America, and they will say, yes, some of our teachers of my kids were great. There's some that should not be in front of the classroom. They all have this experience.
So where does this case go next? In California and elsewhere, and Connecticut is looking at it as well. And we have about 30 seconds.
Yeah, I love the rate that we're talking, actually. I feel like...
That goes quickly.
Yeah, no, the judge said that this will this basically will pend an appeal, so nothing's going to happen until an appeal is heard. But there are other states already, like New Jersey and New York, that are working on copycat
Would you say,
suits.
we have about 20 seconds, a novel legal argument that might gain traction here?
Absolutely.
And therefore take it out of the hands of legislators who are often really struggling with this issue for the obvious reasons.
Often receive campaign contributions from teachers' unions, right? And to say that that doesn't affect their decision-making on this, I think, would be naive.
Okay, Bob Bowdon, Executive Director at Choice Media. Thank you so much. Come back soon. Tomorrow on Arisexchange, something you probably don't know. South Dakota is a tax haven. So why are so many companies calling that state home? Taking a look at the final numbers on Wall Street, a relatively quiet day. All green across the board, but not much movement. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching Arisexchange. We will see you on Tuesday.